All right, thanks, April. I was just ready to say we can kick off the live stream now. So this is the March 7th DEI and Environmental Justice OWEB Board Committee meeting. And Dan, I will pass it off to you for introductions. I think I already told you we have no public comment today, either written or signed up for public comment. And Kelly, our co-chair, will be about 15-20 minutes late. I'll hand it off to you to get started, but lean on me for anything you need.
Excellent, as always. Thank you, Courtney. Great recovery. Gosh, I always have so many issues with Zoom on my end. So welcome everyone. It's great to be here this morning. Thanks for making the time, and we've got a robust agenda. I'm Dan Shively, U.S. Forest Service representative as a non-voting member to the OWEB board and co-chair of OWEB's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And as Courtney mentioned, Kelly Coates, my esteemed co-chair, will be arriving 15 or 20 minutes late to this meeting this morning. Hey, just as a quick reminder, our meeting this morning is being live streamed on OWEB's YouTube channel and recorded. I'd like to remind those that are participating and watching via YouTube that the meeting materials are in the board and committee section. If you go to OWEB's website, you'll find those materials there. Committee materials are towards the bottom of the page, and viewers can click on the relevant committee and have access to the current meeting materials as well as past meeting recordings. I'd like to start, and I will do this in the order that folks appear on my screen. I'd like to start with some committee member introductions. So Stephanie, I'm just going to go in order of folks on my screen. Stephanie Page.
All right, morning everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Bruce Buckmaster.
Thanks, Dan. Bruce Buckmaster, member at large from Astoria, Oregon.
Beautiful city. I was in over the weekend, passing through. A little too much rain.
I heard you were here.
The Seagulls announced it. Eric Hartstein.
Good morning. Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator with OWEB.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Chris Allen.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. Chris Allen, non-voting OWEB board member representing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for being here. Aaron Curtis. You're on mute. There we go, Aaron.
Sorry about that. I'm a Zoom novice, so to speak. Aaron Curtis, ex officio member representing the Bureau of Land Management.
Thank you, Aaron. Let's go to, I guess that might do it. April, are you with us or are you just on hold? There we go. April?
Good morning, April with OWEB Executive Director Assistant.
And Courtney, do you want to introduce yourself again for the record?
Yes, Courtney Schaff, OWEB's Monitoring and Reporting Program Manager. So, and I'm not sure if Lisa can mute and unmute herself. She is still driving into the office. Maybe when she pops on camera, we can have her introduce herself.
Let's do that. Did I miss anyone? I think I got everyone.
That looks good.
Okay, let us take a quick peek at the meeting agenda. That was emailed out in advance of the meeting, and what we have in store this morning. I had it up just a second ago, bear with me. Too many open emails. Right there. Here we are. All right. So our first agenda item is for OWEB staff to share with us their outreach efforts with new partners. That will be Lisa and Stephanie. And Stephanie, I might ask that you kick that off until Lisa's able to join us.
Yep.
Agenda item. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Morning, everybody. I'll just walk through the outreach that we've done since the last DEI committee meeting. And I also thought I would start off by mentioning that in addition to the meetings that I'll mention in terms of outreach to new partners or periodic meetings with partners that we're building relationships with, OWEB also has regular coordination meetings with, for example, the Oregon Conservation Partnership, with conservation community members and ag organization representatives. So there are some ongoing coordination meetings with folks that we're in partnership with that are not reflected in the list that I'm going to give. And I just thought that might be helpful background.
Thank you.
So,
say Stephanie. Stephanie? Yeah, real quickly, let me just review the agenda and then we'll start with your topic. Is that okay?
Oh, great. Sure.
Okay. And then we'll see if there's any additional agenda items and get going. Okay. So after that update, we'll go next to next steps on OWEB's board equity statement. That will be Courtney and Eric. Third will be language accessibility. Fourth will be public comment. We heard from Courtney, there is none submitted. And then topics for our next meeting. We'll spend a few minutes reviewing potential topics for our next meeting. Are there any other additions or changes to the agenda before we start with Stephanie? Okay, take it away, Stephanie. Thank you.
Okay, so since the last quarterly update that we provided at the December 7th DEI committee meeting, we've had some follow-up meetings, so I'll go over those and then I'll cover the new partners that we've met with. So we had a follow-up meeting in December with Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, and Bruce was able to join us for that, which was great. So we met with the creation justice advocate at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon to talk about, I think, helping connect them with local partners in the communities where member denominations are interested in doing watershed work. So we're going to have another follow-up meeting to help connect Charisse, the creation justice advocate, with some of the conservation partnership members. So that's the next step in that one. We continue to have regular meetings, probably a couple times a year, with the Oregon Community Foundation. Just scrolling down here. I've continued to attend Say Hey, which is a networking event for diverse professionals in the Portland metro area, and some other friends and colleagues in state government have joined me for some of those. So that's been really fun to connect other people to that event. And then one other follow-up connection, got to attend the Albina Vision Trust Community Investment Plan open house last night. So that was an informal event for community members and prospective partners to come and learn more about the community investment plan and the vision for the Albina neighborhood and possible opportunities to work together. So those were some follow-ups on previous connections that we have made. And then new connections, we had a meeting with the Intertwine Alliance with Tara Wilkinson, the co-director of the Alliance, just learning about their work focused on a healthy regional system of parks, trails, and natural areas. We met with the Clean Rivers Coalition, which is a group of local governments and other partners too, who work together on community outreach related to water quality in their areas. We had a meet and greet with the executive director of Columbia Riverkeeper, Lauren Goldberg, and we talked about OWEB's grant programs and just areas of possible mutual interest going forward there. We met with Gary Stevenson, the director of the OSU Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems, and talked a bit about the Oregon Ag Heritage Program, some of the drought resiliency and post-wildfire recovery programs that OWEB is administering, and just talked about future opportunities to connect. Gary is about to retire, so we'll reach out to his successor once they are appointed and to help continue that relationship. And I think that's everything on the list. So, and then we've got, I think several of you have suggested additional folks for us to outreach to. So I just wanted to let everybody know in the log that I keep of outreach, I'm keeping a list of prospective folks that you've suggested to reach out to in the future. And I think, Bruce, you had suggested at the last meeting to take a look at the EJ participants in the Global Warming Commission's Natural and Working Lands outreach. So I've got some of the folks that attended that, some of those sessions on the list to reach out to in the future, as well as some folks that OWEB staff and partners have suggested. So that's the end of my report, and happy to take any questions, or Lisa, if you would like to add anything.
Yes, let's start with Lisa adding anything. If you're with us, Lisa, there
Yes.
we are. And then also an introduction, and then we'll have Kelly introduce herself.
Sure, thank you. Lisa Sharplow Hansen, Executive Director at OWEB. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been a busy quarter with a lot of new relationships being built, and we can continue to be really excited about that work. So I will just stop there. Steph, thanks for covering it.
All right, Kelly, thanks for joining. Quick introduction, then we'll see if there are any questions or discussions for Stephanie and Lisa. Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. Kelly Coates, Tribal Representative on the OWEB board, and apologies for being late this morning. I was double booked with meetings right at 8:30.
Not a problem, not a problem. Well, thank you for that great and detailed update, Stephanie. Committee members, any questions for Stephanie or Lisa? Okay, not seeing or hearing any. Let's move on to the next topic, and that will be Courtney and Eric Hartstein giving an update and discussing next steps on our OWEB board equity statement. Courtney and Eric, not sure in what order. Take it away.
I'll kick us off. I think we'll tag team this and hopefully get some great comment and conversation from our board members. So since our last meeting, Eric and I have been doing some pondering about next steps for the board equity statement. And at the same time, we also had a training with Eco Northwest around language, which was really thought-provoking for all of us at OWEB. And so we've been thinking about a lot how words matter. And we took the feedback from the last board committee meeting, and Bruce sent afterwards a definitions document, because we had talked about, high level of the equity statement, but we'd also talked about definitions and some suggested changes. And so what we did is Eric and I really took a hard look at the document and looked at the words that were being used and some of the inconsistencies that we would use, a sentence here, and then we would, make it a little bit different, a couple paragraphs down, and really decided that we thought a great focus of this meeting to move the equity statement forward would be just to kind of decide on the core words we want to use, and then fall back on the definitions of those words. So then Eric and I can go back and make sure that we are consistent in our language in the document. We're not jumping around, and then we can have a definitions page associated with the document that we all agree on. And then at the next meeting, what we would bring is the definitions, a cleaned up document with consistent language, as well as incorporated the comments and the feedback that we got at the last meeting. And I think that will really help us move forward. What Eric did was do some research with the help of Jesse on staff to look at what are some of the definitions that have been used in other instances throughout the state enterprise, whether in statute or governor's office publications. We thought that's a great place to start to make sure that we're falling back on state enterprise definitions and language that are used across other state agencies. So what I would like the focus of our conversation to be is I pulled out from the draft document the kind of high level words that we thought need to be defined. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about those words or phrases, and then we'll talk about the definitions that we have pulled from state enterprise documents. We have some draft definitions that we can look at and start the conversation there today. So first off, any thought, Eric, anything you want to add, and then anything from the committee members about that approach?
That sounds good, Courtney. Thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. If I can find my mouse that I have now lost on my computer. Here it is. Nope. Okay. All right. Eric, I can see you. Can you see my screen? Excellent. Okay. So looking at the document where we left it last time, these were the words that Eric and I really pulled out as words that we thought we need to make sure we agree on, that we want to use in the document, and then words that we want to move forward with defining through our definitions term in the document. Diversity, equity, inclusion, those ones are fairly straightforward. We then had environmental justice, BIPOC communities, Indigenous peoples, non-traditional knowledge, traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities, and underrepresented and impacted communities. And I think where Eric and I, as we were working through and looking at the document and having these conversations, we really realized that, thinking of BIPOC communities, Indigenous peoples, traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities, underrepresented and impacted communities. We thought it would be really great to make sure we're all on the same page about how specific do we want to be, what are the types of words that we want to use so that we can, again, be consistent, have a clear definition, and OWEB board, staff, and the community members we serve know what we're talking about when we're talking about our equity statement. I think I will pause there and see if anyone has any comments on these words that I've put on the screen, any different words that they think we should think about using, or any words that maybe, or phrases that we shouldn't use and should shift away from. And it's a lot to kind of kick off with at 8:30 in the morning.
Courtney, I've got a question for the record. Chris Allen, could you clarify again whether these words that have been pulled out of our equity statement to date, whether we have definitions already? You had mentioned other state agencies' use of these words and potential definitions that have already been developed. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of us a little bit here.
And I don't think there was any necessarily right way to start this conversation. So you're paving the path forward, Chris. So these are the words that Eric was able to pull out of some other state enterprise documents. You'll see we have a definition for environmental justice, environmental justice community, diversity, equity, inclusion, and then Ken Fecho, our tribal liaison, helped us kind of pull this from federal guidance, the traditional ecological knowledge definition. So these are the ones that we were, able to pull from other documents that can be a great starting point. Whether we want to think about, using environmental justice community in place of some of the other definitions we have up there, open to all ideas. And Kelly's got her hand up.
Yeah, I appreciate that you guys have already done some homework on some of these definitions. That's really helpful. My question is around the traditionally underrepresented and marginalized communities, and then the underrepresented and impacted communities. So I understand the difference here is the marginalized communities versus impacted communities part of it, but and I think it's important to have these in there. I just see these maybe getting a little bit confusing for folks. So I was wondering if you all had put any thought into kind of parsing out those two definitions.
Go ahead, Eric. You came off mute.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney, and thanks, Kelly. It's a great question. Courtney, if you maybe scroll down to the second page. So one of the things that when we pulled some of the terms out of House Bill 4077, this was passed in 2022, and it's environmental justice statutes. And one of the revisions to the statutes actually includes OWEB as a natural resource agency for which these environmental justice statutes do apply. So this is directly relevant to the agency right now. We thought maybe something like the environmental justice communities definition might be a way to help define, get at that underserved communities definition, or both of the terms that are noted above, as a way to perhaps start to answer your question.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Thank you.
And you can see, as Eric and I were working on this, we left this question in here. Does this environmental justice community definition help us really define underserved communities? And I think probably what we're all struggling with, as I scroll back up here, is does one large bucket, do we want everything in one large bucket as an agency when we're writing our equity statement? Do we want some smaller buckets? To be clear, if we want smaller buckets, what are those and how do we define them? And we can try it a couple different ways. Eric and I, based on this conversation today and thoughts and opinions, we can play around with the equity statement before the next meeting and come up with a couple different approaches. But it's definitely, I know, something I struggle with about the lumping and the splitting.
I've got a question. I will struggle with finding the raise hand feature here in Zoom. So Eric and Courtney, did you give thought to blending the last two terms, since there is so much intermingling, right? Like really trying to get clarity around what is the distinction between those two sets of titles or terms.
We did not yet, but open to ideas that might blend or combine those two terms or phrases.
Okay. And then I'm assuming that BIPOC communities and indigenous peoples fit under either one or both or a blend of those two more general titles.
They do, yes. And so
Okay.
again, we can pull them out explicitly if we feel like we need to call them out explicitly within our equity statement, or thinking about rolling things up if we're comfortable with that approach. So I saw Bruce and then
Bruce
Kelly.
Yep.
Thanks. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, just to muddy things up even further. There are communities is the second part of a number of different definitions, phrases that are used throughout these types of statements. So we could talk about frontline communities. Disadvantaged communities is also a term that's used frequently in these. Impacted communities, environmental justice communities. So I don't know if there's a way to, following Dan's question, if there's a way to talk about what we mean by communities and how that, and all these different adjectives for community. But we put some of them are there, but there are a lot more that are showing up in DEI and environmental justice statements across the state.
Kelly?
Yeah, I think Bruce has a really good point about the communities definition, because I am hearing that term community a lot more now, and it just has so many definitions depending on what community you're specifically talking about. So I think that's a great point, Bruce. As far as sort of lumping and splitting of things goes, I'm unsure. I don't really think we should lump. This is a tough one. I'm not sure if we should lump Indigenous peoples in with the other communities, because from a Native American Indigenous peoples perspective, it's a different relationship, especially with the state of Oregon. It's that government to government relationship. And so I think that needs to somehow be recognized or pulled out or separated a bit from everything else. So I think that's something we should just be cognizant of as we move forward.
I think it was Aaron and then Dan, but I was typing, so I could have missed the order.
I think Dan was next.
Go. Okay, I'll jump in. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, this having this discussion and getting clarity, I think, is really important, and that's the tough work here in front of us. To add one more, well, let me just pose it as a question to you, Courtney, and to Eric. I noticed that underserved is not on the list, and I often hear of underserved communities. Perhaps that's a term of the past. Could either of you comment on that? Maybe it's inclusive with one of the two bottom terms. I don't know.
So I guess I would say underserved communities was not, so the ones up here in the page one are directly taken from the equity statement. So we did not have underserved communities in the current draft of the equity statement. So that's why that's not represented up here. Doesn't mean it's not something else we can and should consider. Aaron?
I guess my take is I think I would echo Kelly's idea that if anything needs to be kind of separated from the larger group, right, the lump and splitting, I think Indigenous peoples warrants that, whether it be, right, how they're still actively using the land now, whether they're bringing ideas to the table about stewardship of the lands and waters, and then also just places of, you know, whether it be traditional or religious significance, right, that may be out there that could be affected by all of our respected work. So, and that's, I guess, my question on the bullet list is I had never heard the term non-traditional knowledge. So I guess I was curious. I had always, I guess, what context is that coming from, that bullet?
I mean, again, we tried to pull out some of the things that phrases or things that we thought would generate conversation. So it was used in the context of the equity statement. I think likely how Eric and I would want to edit the statement would be to more focus on traditional ecological knowledge, a more commonly used term, versus non-traditional knowledge. Again, trying to think of it, one of the feedback we had from the last meeting is trying to frame things in the forward thinking and in the positive thinking, and there were some kind of more retrospective comments or sentences in the current draft version. So that's why thinking about how do we frame these up based on kind of the words that we think we want to call out and consistent language will really help Eric and I move the statement forward.
Okay. Because I do, and at least a federal context, we typically refer to as traditional knowledge if we're talking about Indigenous knowledge, right? So, I mean, I would like traditional Indigenous knowledge is kind of the yeah, because I guess I look at it and I look at this stuff quite often, right? And I'm like, I never heard of that.
And then Lisa.
Thanks. So I was thinking about the underserved piece of it and the state's definition. We consider in Oregon, you know, rural communities can be underserved, and that may be something we want to think about in our equity statement. Those places, you know, outside of the Willamette Valley or urban centers.
And I think that's one of the reasons Eric and I pulled up this environmental justice community definition. You'll see here traditionally underrepresented, rural communities, remote communities, coastal communities. There's a lot in here. I guess maybe one of the things that I would ask the group as I have this definition pulled up is we've heard specifically the importance of pulling out tribal or Indigenous communities. Are there other community groups identified in this environmental, I guess two questions for the group. Do you like the idea, what do you think of the idea of using environmental justice community as defined here? And are there other community groups as listed in this definition that should be called out specifically in our statement? Kelly.
So what strikes me when I read this definition is how many communities are included in this, and it's pretty striking just how many of those, you know, I think about the state of Oregon and it makes me think like, what is not an environmental justice community, right? Based on this definition. So, and I'm not quite sure how to capture that, you know, because it is just so broad and all encompassing. So I'm wrestling a little bit with that. And then the other thing is, as far as, you know, including tribal communities under an environmental justice community or an underserved group or an impacted group, I think that's still applicable to tribal communities. I just think it's important to call them out separately because of that government to government and the tribal sovereignty aspect of things. So I don't think we necessarily have to pull out. We can still acknowledge that tribal communities are a part of this environmental justice community. So just kind of my thoughts on that right there. And then as far as the question about, do we need to pull out other communities specifically, I'm not sure about that. Again, just because this is so broad and all encompassing. It's, you know, I'm wrestling with that. So.
Anyone catch the order? I was typing and taking notes.
Yeah, I'm curious. Go ahead. Let's go Aaron, Bruce, and then I'll go last. Aaron.
So I guess just one idea to throw out there instead of, right, because I get when we're trying to define community, we want to be inclusive and we want to, right, but I also just, I guess I wonder, I mean, we could just continue brainstorming and make this paragraph probably, you know, 3 pages long if we wanted to. And so I guess another way to look at it would be, you know, maybe an environmental justice community is community facing environmental justice challenges, right? Per the definition above. And then you can say these can include, et cetera, right? Because I do think, because the way I think it is right now, without any, I know the 2 definitions will go together, right? But I mean, I'm just looking, I'm like, well, why are those coastal folks an environmental justice community? Aren't they just like having fun at the beach all day long, right? I mean, I think that's where's the context? And I guess, and that's where I wonder if, right, I don't know. I mean, my guess is that's been identified because of potential impacts from climate change. I mean, I don't know, right? Where are we coming at that from? And I guess that's where I think that is a big piece of the environmental justice effort, right? Is we've got past inequities, but we know more are coming up related to climate change, right? And so I think, you know, that's a big piece of our challenges moving forward. And how do we want, or if at all, to integrate those types of pieces into this?
Thanks, Aaron. Bruce.
Kelly makes a great point. Every Oregonian belongs to a community. So that's the sum total. But the reason we're doing this statement, a DEI environmental justice statement, is to deal with the recognition of a systemic problem. So what communities have been left out? So the point that, as I see it, as we look at particular communities and highlight those, it doesn't in any way negatively impact the communities that have already been involved, traditionally been involved. But so I think it's, in order to go forward, we need to step back and look at why are we actually doing this statement, and what is it addressing? Why is it addressing? What are the things we're acknowledging and wanting to be sensitive? No, be actively engaged in remedies going forward. So I think picking out this, and I like the environmental justice communities, but I think as we have to start looking at other definitions or other communities, when we talk about what I think Aaron was saying, the traditional ecological knowledge, which has been used so broadly now that it actually has a acronym. People say TEK, and so if that's become common use, and we want this to be a simple, understandable statement, maybe that would be, I would think we might consider using that. So Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Again, good dialogue here. This is a complex and layered topic, and words do matter. And as some of you recall, as I've shared some of my history and background with both my parents having been sociologists, they would be very interested in engaging in this conversation. And these titles, these terms shift and change over time too. In fact, I'm running through in my mind, oh, have we left some communities out? I think we have. And I like the idea of environmental justice community, in that we can acknowledge that assemblage could shift and evolve and adapt through time. I also think it's important to where we know there are strong identities around types of communities that we call those out too. That doesn't mean that we're in any way diminishing these communities, but we're recognizing them broadly. Then there's this whole list of terms, and we're blending and intermingling them with communities being underserved, underrepresented. Something that's happened in the past or present that we're looking to remedy through future action. And probably most all, if not all, of the different community types are going to fit various, if not all, aspects of those adjectives Bruce, you pointed out earlier, i.e. they are underrepresented, they're underserved, they're impacted in one way or another. What's important here is that we're not creating terms or definitions where communities or people within communities feel like we've misrepresented who they are, what they stand for, and what level of impact it is we're looking to remedy, whether that's through representation, delivery, etc. And I think having those caveats, perhaps provisos, acknowledgements at the very top of a definitions list creates awareness, intention, and really sets the stage, because as humans, we typically quickly go to a term and a definition, and then we get locked into those boundaries. And so I think that tone up front will be really important. That's all I had to offer. Yeah, Kelly, you have your hand up next.
Thanks, Dan. We're on the same page here. That's exactly what I was thinking, that we want to be careful not to exclude anyone. So I think, some of the, like having that caveat or some language in there, all I can think of is including but not limited to, because we don't want anyone left out. We don't, and if a population or a community gets left out, it's not intentionally. And so we want to, again, acknowledge this. And I think throughout our statement, what we're trying to acknowledge is that we don't know it all, and that this is our best effort, but we know we're going to make mistakes. And so just acknowledging that up front with some kind of language, I think might be helpful too.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Kelly. Courtney, Eric, how are the two of you tracking thus far in the conversation and the feedback?
This is a great conversation. I just want to add that I'm pleased that seems like there's some good support for this environmental justice communities definition. And part of the reason why is that we're using actually a good chunk of this for our climate evaluation criteria rulemaking around local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. So there's some good synergy there.
And I would just add that this conversation is so helpful to move the equity statement forward. I think you guys have all collectively said some really key points about what you want to see in the equity statement, why we're doing it, some great ideas for terminology around both definitions and then the things that we should call out. This, I feel like, gives maybe Eric and I finally a little bit more solid ground to move forward on, and bring next time, I think, hopefully a big step forward in a document that's focusing on consistent language and called out some of the things that you guys have commented on. So I think I'll just scroll back up here and see if there's any other comments or any other just take-home messages that Eric and I should really think about as we work on the next version. Bruce.
I'm wondering if there might be some benefit to taking a more, at least interjecting throughout our statement, some positive issues. For instance, we as OWEB celebrate the rich mix of communities in Oregon, and we actively commit to include all communities within our decision making. So as far as a umbrella statement that talks about everything that's out there, and the whole reason we're doing this is to make sure that we're including all communities. I think a statement like that ahead of all these other definitions saying, and these are some examples of things we need to do, might get us back to the sense that this is a resolution. We're looking at a resolution of how we're going to act in the future.
Great point, Bruce. Aaron, you have your hand up next.
Yeah, I love that kickoff statement, Bruce. So hopefully somebody captured that. Yeah, and I guess my only suggestion, I think, and I would defer to you when the timing is right on this, but you know, I guess my take is when we have an initial draft, that it makes a lot of sense to maybe give some sneak peeks to the draft statement to, you know, what we're referring to as environmental justice communities, right? And because I think we've all recognized that we're, you know, in a lot of ways trying to thread the needle, you know, be as inclusive as possible, not leave anybody out, not be, you know, unintentionally use the wrong words. So I think that's going to be a key step in the finalization of the final statement.
Thank you, Aaron. That's great feedback. And I was actively taking notes during Bruce's brilliant commentary.
Soliloquy.
So what I see as the next steps is Eric and I will put our heads together, do some adjustments, share this with the group at the next committee meeting. And then I think maybe what might be a great idea is to connect with Stephanie and Lisa and some of the groups that they're meeting with, and maybe some of the repeat groups that they're meeting with that have learned a little bit more about OWEB, share the draft equity statement with them after you have all had a chance to work on it again to get some feedback. And then probably what we're looking at is the fall, bringing it back to the full board, making sure that, again, we're all having the time to be reflective on this, because I think it's really helping it make it a better statement. Excellent. All right. And then I need to
Thanks,
find it.
everyone. Yeah, appreciate you summing that up, Courtney. Are there any last comments on this topic before we move on to our third agenda item? The next agenda item's kind of related.
It is. And my name was not on there,
Yeah.
Dan, but I will kick this off and then open it up to Eric Hartstein, Lisa, and Stephanie to add as they want. But it was just raised a couple times through some different conversations with OWEB staff that it would be great for this committee to talk a little bit about language accessibility and the work OWEB is doing. And so wanted to update you on some of the work we're doing and also get feedback or ideas of maybe what you are doing amongst your organizations around language. As I mentioned at the very beginning, OWEB did have a training with Eco Northwest that was really well done, that just talked about language use and language accessibility and got all of us thinking a little bit about the words we use, some of the words we use to describe some of our grant offerings, some of the language we use on our website, in our publications, and we're all working to collectively just kind of pause and take a step back and think about how words matter and how we can all hold each other accountable to make sure we're using words that are not harmful, that don't have a history of being harmful, and also reframing things so that they are understandable to the broader public around Oregon. Around the broader public and accessibility, our publication specialists have created a plain language guidance document to be used by staff, which is helping us think about how do we proof our documents? What are different resources we can go to make sure we're not writing too academically? What are word alternatives that we could be using when we're talking about riparian areas or stream complexity, LWD? Just trying to, make sure that the documents we're putting out there can be understood by all the communities of Oregon and not just necessarily our grantees and our immediate people we're interacting with. Part of that, Linda has been, if anyone follows us on social media, she is amazing, has been doing, I think it's on Tuesdays, she defines different terms that are often used within the restoration world, provides examples of them, definitions, pictures, again, to get out there, trying to help people understand the broader perspective. We have regular schedule by which staff are required to go in and review the content on all of OWEB's web pages. Now we're building into that, looking at the readability. What's the language level we're writing at? Are there words, again, there that are maybe more complex and not as easily understood by the general public? Can we find alternative words? Can we make sure that we aren't, that we're writing at the appropriate level for the audience that we're targeting? Those are the things that I wanted to update folks on. Lisa or Stephanie or Eric, any other thoughts about the things that we're doing internally to make language just more accessible to all Oregonians?
Thanks, Court. I think you did a nice job of capturing it. It really is, I think, our focus to try and make things available so everyone in Oregon can understand what we're doing and understand that there are state dollars that are going to work that make Oregon's waters cleaner, that provide planting along stream side to make water cooler. So there are words I'm even training myself now to try and think about when I describe some of the work where we traditionally would have used, a technical term in the water quality world. It's been a retraining for myself. So I think you did a great job kind of capturing the effort and the impetus of that.
Anything to add, Eric? Nope. Bruce?
I like where you're going with this, Courtney. Every one of us has been in a position. First time I got on a fishing boat, somebody shows up at Lisa's and she starts talking about sheep or any situation that you find yourself talking to and realizing there's a different language that you have no idea what it is. It may seem like jargon, but there are clearly defined definitions for every word they're using. You just don't understand them. So the idea that our language will have evolved into, by just sheer necessity, well, it'll have evolved into somewhat of a jargon. So being able to go back, getting somebody to read one of our documents and telling us what they mean, if they've never done any watershed work at all, would be a fascinating exercise for you. And as far as saying what is in our document that might be OWEB jargon, have a junior in high school read it. So anyway, thanks. Great idea.
One of the nice benefits of some of our recent hires at OWEB are we have definitely hired a few people that did not have background in natural resources work and have asked some great questions, which have been good learning opportunities for all of us. My test has always been, well, can I explain it to my mom? Kelly.
Yeah, I think you guys are spot on with this. I was actually just thinking the same thing, Courtney. I've hired a number of new staff over the last few months, and some of them have had no natural resources background. And I didn't realize how often we talk in acronyms and jargon at all of our meetings. And she was sitting next to me trying to take notes, and at the end of it, she just had this list. She just started taking lists of acronyms, and then afterwards she was like, what is this? What does this mean? What is the context behind this right here? Mm-hmm. And it was really eye-opening for me, and I think for a lot of my staff as well. So we started, when we would have conversations or be in meetings and we would throw these things out, we found ourselves sort of stopping after we said an acronym or something and then saying, this means this, and what it is this. And then the person would go, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense now in the context of what we're talking about. And so I think that it's really, really helpful. And I think for those of us that have been doing this for a number of years, we just go. We just start talking in acronyms and go, and we don't stop, and we just assume everybody knows until we are the person in the room. When I'm talking with like our ag folks about something, and I'm like, wait, what is that? What does that mean? Okay, gotcha. Now it's this. And so I think this is a really great thing for us to be talking about and a great thing for you all to be doing. And I think this is really going to help OWEB and what we do seem more accessible to everyone, as opposed to just our niche of folks that apply for the grants or are in that restoration bubble world. So I think this is fantastic, and any way that we can help with this, or I can help support it, just let me know.
Bruce is next, but I think, Kelly, what I typed when you were writing is I think it makes us all slow down and pause when we're talking to think about the words and move a little slower. And maybe as we think about, the board meeting and even staff presentations, really, encourage all of you to help us as staff, kind of slow down and make sure we're clear in the language we're using. as we continue to try to make this accessible to everybody. Bruce?
Yeah. Yes, Courtney. I think Eric will remember. This isn't the first time we've done this. We did it with the strategic plan. At one point, we had a number of acronyms in that. Speaking to Kelly's point, and we went back because there were questions. We had new people coming in and in and out of the board, and we had it loaded up and went back and really looked at, and Courtney, I'm sure you remember it as well. This plays right into Lisa's work on OWEB 101. And so we know we can do it. We've done it before. And so.
Dan?
Reminds me of a story. We met with a marketing firm. It's been about 10 years ago now, and we were talking about how to package up this great work on the North Oregon coast, having to do with improving fish passage at road stream crossings, and everybody kept using the term culvert. And the head of the firm, finally, an hour into this conversation, this marketing firm said, "Can one of you tell me what a culvert means?" We were so sure everybody in the entire general public would know what a culvert is. And yeah, case in point, I like this conversation. I could see it being a big task. Maybe we treat it as kind of a work in progress and kind of a progressive body of work, and it does change over time. I also think back to the changing terms we've used just to describe organic material in our rivers and streams, from large woody debris to large wood to woody material to it changes over time. Lisa?
Well, thanks for the feedback. I appreciate this conversation. Just from experience coming to a new agency, a 1.5 years ago, you would think I would have the jargon down by now, but I don't. There's some of our acronyms that I still don't remember. And so it's been important, I think, as we've talked about equity and inclusion, to think about how we write to everyone. And it's a real commitment for me. And I get caught in it too when I get in a hurry, using, the words that I know that sound knowledgeable in this space, but to force myself to step back and to think about, again, how I would describe it to someone in my family that has no idea about what I do or the place that I work. And so this feedback and positive feedback from the board, I think for all of us is incredibly rewarding. So thank you for that.
All right, Courtney's typing. Chris, let's go to you and then start wrapping this topic up.
You're muted.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, this is definitely an interesting topic to me as a federal employee, where our sentences are generally made up half of acronyms. I guess I'm thinking of the climate resolution, which was developed and passed before I came on as a board member. But given the inherent scientific aspect behind that resolution, I'm just curious if this topic of plain language came up when that was being developed.
Bruce, Eric?
I think it did. It did definitely, Chris. But I would ask that you read it and then report back.
I'll do that, Bruce.
Good feedback.
I like that. Yeah, handing out homework assignments. Love it. Courtney, have we covered the bases on this one?
We have covered the bases. Great feedback. Thank you all.
Okay, moving right along. There's no public comment today. And we're down to the last agenda item, and that is to quickly review or hear from you all next topics for our next meeting. And Courtney, can just for the record remind us when our next committee meeting is? Thanks.
Oh, I do not have my email up in front of me.
That's okay. I'll look it up. Yeah.
Maybe April can quickly holler out to me when that is. What we have on the agenda right now, and open to any thoughts, is we will continue our conversations of outreach to new partners, continue discussion on the equity statement, and then Ken Fetcho in our office has scheduled the tribal training that we talked about as a result of the tribal assessment report. That's going to occur in April, so we'll be excited to share the feedback from that training and next steps related to the tribal assessment report. And thank you, April. The next meeting is June 7th. So any additional topics people would like to see on our June 7th agenda? Great. That's it, Dan.
Yeah, just for the record, Kelly, I may or may not be with you all June 7th. We're new grandparents, so we're trying to time our visit to see our new granddaughter back on the East Coast, and those dates are still in the air.
Congratulations.
I'll keep you posted. Yeah, thanks. Thank you. All right, well, unless there are any other questions, remarks, good thoughts for the day, for our work. Kelly, do you want to close us out? Any
I'm just going to quickly say thank you all for a really thoughtful discussion today on two topics and just being really engaged. It was really valuable feedback, and I, for one, feel like we've got some good guidance to move forward with the equity statement. So thank you for being so engaged this morning.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in person next month in Salem.
Yes.
Kelly, close us out.
I just want to say, again, thank you everyone for your time. This was a really, really good discussion. I feel like everybody had at least 2 cups of coffee before they got on the meeting today. So I look forward to our next meeting in June. And just thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.